attendance except for Councilmember Elrod. So we'll go ahead, get started. This is the conversation on recommended administrative amendments to our sales tax code. City Attorney Kemp.
Mayor, Council, these amendments sort of raise the question, why are we doing this? Essentially, citizens have really three major interactions with our city codes: our zoning code, our building code, and our sales tax code. And the sales tax code, we last year adopted the uniform definitions that were promulgated by the Colorado Municipal League. But as part of that, there's some other areas in the code that are not particularly user-friendly, and this is one of the first that we're going to bring to you to help make this a more workable code. Basically, a total of 6 changes that we are proposing, and the first change is that we propose to designate, instead of city treasurer, finance director. We don't have a city treasurer, and throughout this code, it uses the term city treasurer. And we've made changes to the charter to reflect finance director, but we've never done that in the code, so we're now proposing to do that in the code. Secondly, normally you would have in the code the references to the finance director and the duties of their deputies and assistants all in one section. In this particular code, they're in different sections. We're proposing to simply put them together in one section rather than having them in different parts of the code. The third thing that we are proposing to do in the code is we have 2 sections that talk about the duty of keeping books and records. It's very confusing because some of the duties in one section and some of the duties in another section. We're proposing to combine those into a single section. Again, this makes it more user-friendly. If I'm a taxpayer, I only have to look at one section. I'm not trying to figure out, okay, what do they mean by it being in this section or that section? For the violations, we're in multiple places, and we're proposing to put the violations of the code all in one place. Again, it's much easier if I'm a taxpayer if I only have to look at one section to know what's in violation versus looking at multiple sections. The same is true with license requirements. We're proposing to move license requirements all in one section and to break up those requirements into subsections. It's much easier, again, if I'm an ordinary person, to look and see 1, 2, 3, 4, versus having it all sort of in a continuous paragraph. And again, we're making a change to finance director from city treasurer. Finally, we're also proposing to use the term calendar days instead of business days, which is more consistent with state law. And one of the reasons that that is important is that different cities have different holiday schedules. So again, as a taxpayer, business days may mean something different in Centennial than it does in Littleton. Calendar days means the same thing everywhere. And finally, the collection and refund of disputed taxes, we're proposing to again put in one section so that again the taxpayer knows exactly how that process works. We looked at a number of sales tax codes. One of the more recently amended and updated codes was the City of Aurora. And much of what we are doing here, Aurora has recently done, and we're proposing to you to bring forth a very similar amendment in this area. There are other areas of the sales tax code that in the future we'll be coming back on. But what we propose to do is this is a very discrete piece. This will make this piece of the code more user-friendly, and our recommendation would be to ask you to let us go ahead and bring this to you on a first read. We think it will also make the code more effective for individuals who are the taxpayers who have to deal with it. Finally, this is not what we call a change in tax policy that would require voter approval under the taxpayer bill. This is not significantly changing the tax policy. And so with that, I would be happy and Tiffany Newton, our finance director, is here, and we'd both be happy to answer any questions that the council might have.
Jerry?
Yeah, excuse me, on page, well done, thank you. On page 1, on the second page where we have the duties of finance director provided for in this charter, so on and so forth. I would suggest putting as directed at the end of that. It just makes it sound as though anybody can do this, but I'm thinking this is more of a as directed. And the only other item that I saw in there that I thought might add something was on page 2 in your new part, where it starts out, it shall be the duty of every person. I thought adding in there, including but not limited to all city employees. But that's just to be considered type stuff. After that, it all looked good to me, thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem, the reason that reference wouldn't be there is this section here isn't really pertaining to our employees, it's only pertaining to the taxpayer. Our employees are required by other sections of the code to maintain records internally, but this is really focused on the taxpayer.
Oh, I see, yes, you're absolutely right. Now I look at it again, yeah. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Okay, so then you'll bring this back.
Mayor, Council, we propose based on this to bring this back to you on a first read. I believe it will be in the last meeting in July or first meeting in August, and then assuming council passage on the first read, it would come to you on the second read for public hearing and adoption.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Mayor.
For the record.
Our next.
8 minutes.
Good going. Our next item is a review of the drainage easements on the Cooley Lake property for the Wild Plum subdivision for proposed resolution.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Anastasia Irvin. I'm the Development Services Manager with the Department of Public Works. I do have a brief PowerPoint presentation for you tonight to walk through this agenda item. It is a preview of an agenda item that you'll see before you in the form of a resolution on July 17th at your formal City Council meeting. The reason that easements are presented before you is because easements on city property do require approval by resolution by the City Council. So tonight is just to give an overview of what those easements are, location-wise, and then allow you an opportunity to ask questions, because it is somewhat of a unique situation with the city boundary being between Cooley Lake and the subdivision requesting the easements. And I believe, oh, thank you. We do have the slideshow. One moment, let's see. Okay, so we went through the overview, and this first slide basically gives you an overview of the location of the Wild Plum subdivision. The Wild Plum subdivision is actually in the town of Columbine. And again, because of the interface and the location adjacent to Cooley Lake, that's why this item is before you. It's not approval of the subdivision itself. That was done by the town of Columbine Valley. However, again, their historic drainage pattern, meaning before development, the water did drain into Cooley Lake. There were no formal easements previously. It was just over time there were some existing pipes. And then with redevelopment and design of the subdivision, they do provide for both water quality treatment before discharge into Cooley Lake, and also water detention, meaning storage. And so these easements would allow those ponds basically to discharge into Cooley Lake. And it's important to note too, through drainage law and stormwater regulations, we can't necessarily alter the course of natural drainage ways, but we have to make sure that it's treated according to regulations and doesn't cause undue hardship on downstream properties and also Cooley Lake itself. Cooley Lake, the property is owned by the City of Littleton, and it's managed by South Suburban Park and Recreation District, and it is part of the South Platte Park. So it's one amenity, and some people may not be that familiar with it. It is a restricted access location as part of South Platte Park, as kind of a wildlife preservation area. And they do coordinate, the park district does coordinate guided hikes in certain times of the year to allow access through there. And the proposed subdivision, actually, the subdivision approved by the town of Columbine, it's 105 acres, and it's 95 single-family lots. The developer is Cal Atlantic Homes, who was recently purchased by Lennar Homes, who's a national home builder. And the location, and it might be a little tough to see. Let's see if the location of the easements are in the red locations here. And so the easements themselves cover where the water will drain to. There's two locations that are overflow, so you'll see some rock areas that allow for ponds to discharge. So there's a pond and a buffer area down here. And so this location and this location are both what we know as an overflow spillway location. So those would be visual. And then the other four that are smaller, that are just boxes, are under drains. So to the naked eye, you won't be able to see those locations. You might see the outfall depending on where the water level is in the lake itself. But that primarily will be underground, and so that allows those water quality ponds to drain certain levels. So those are the 6 total locations, 2 overflow and 4 under drain locations. Previously, or before development, there were actually 8 discharges into the lake itself. So again, this is there was a detailed stormwater report, drainage report prepared for the subdivision. Both the report and the subdivision was reviewed by the town of Columbine, and then both city staff from our Public Works Department and South Suburban Park and Recreation District reviewed the technical aspects of the drainage from the report condition and then the actual discharges to the lake. There are no concerns from a staff perspective of technical compliance. The impact will be minimal, but again, because they are constructing improvements on city property, that's why the easements would be required from the city council.
Peggy?
So I think you said this, but if you, just for clarification, so with all this different stuff going on, we aren't expecting any kind of pesticides or other exciting things to wind up into these things?
So through developments of the subdivision, most of their discharge, from yards and the street, is designed to drain to basically water quality ponds. Flipping too fast. Water quality ponds are meant to filter the storm water before it discharges. So through a series of either under drains to go through granular material, some of it will be native grasses that will filter some of it. So I can't guarantee that people won't use pesticides on their yards. Hopefully they do it in a reasonable manner, but those ponds are really meant to filter that storm water before it gets discharged into the waterways. And so that's a better condition, that exists today, because, today or prior to developments, granted there wasn't 95 homes there, but there wasn't a water quality feature. There was just, sod and grass and, some native grasses, but this is specifically designed to filter the water, both from a quality standpoint, and it also provides detention, meaning stormwater volume. So it's meant to slow down the water before it gets discharged into the lake.
Jerry?
So for our attorney, so the responsibility to maintain it, it said here is the homeowners. But what if the homeowners decide that they don't want to spend the funds on it, or they don't have the funds? Why would Columbine Valley, the town of Columbine Valley, not be responsible?
Well, certainly that's what we would do is, we're granting this easement, so we're granting it to the homeowners association, but certainly if the homeowners association went out of existence or whatever, we would propose to go after the town of Columbine Valley, because this is their subdivision and they're draining it into the city, and they would have a responsibility for that drainage. Now, I would tell you, I would expect that the HOA on something like this will be able to maintain it, because generally, for purposes of selling the lots, they have to show within their disclosure statements how they're gonna fund things like this, so I think.
But ultimately, the town of Columbine would.
That's who we'd be looking to for, compensation, should the HOA for some reason go out of existence.
Thank you. You can answer the question. Thank you.
Other question? I have a couple. So you said how many existing storm drainage?
There are 8 total existing locations that are connected to the lake today.
And now they are adding these.
They will abandon or remove, and we'll work with South Suburban and our Water Resources Manager to determine the best way to abandon those pipes. Sometimes it might be best to just kind of cap them in place so they no longer discharge, to not disturb as much vegetation. If both South Suburban and our Water Resources Manager just determine that it's okay to physically remove them, then we would recommend that they physically be removed. But essentially those 8 existing will no longer be discharging the water. They'll be directed to the locations shown in the easements.
So the only area where they're requesting anything is down here on the most southern area?
That is correct. There's an existing ditch, so there is also a water quality pond and detention up in this area. So there's an existing ditch that's known as the Brown Ditch, because that's a natural drainage way, and the discharge actually happens on their property, and they're not altering any of the water courses that exist today in that location. There's not any physical construction that would happen on that property, and the discharge of water would actually probably be less than what it is today to that ditch. Not completely cut off, but it'll be controlled through that pond. So there's not a physical easement that's needed up in this northern portion, because again, for the most part in this area, nothing will change from a physical construction perspective onto our property.
So the most southern area then, the drainage from the driveways and the road, those are that will drain into, they're asking for easement for those?
So the pond itself, the water quality pond and detention pond, will be located on Wild Plum property. And so those easements will be owned, controlled by Town of Columbine and the subdivision.
So the drainage though, the water drainage, so you've got a cul-de-sac in here, you've got street, the water draining off the streets, where does that go?
So some of it will go to this pond, and then I don't know exactly where their break point is, because there'll be a certain point where some of the subdivision will drain to the north pond and some of the subdivision will drain to the south pond. But everything that's draining to the south will go through this water quality and detention pond.
And we don't know how
before
many
it discharges.
We don't know how many houses or how many miles of road that is.
I don't have that detailed information with me today, but it is part of their detailed engineering, design, and drainage
I think it's
report.
about 25 on that southern half there.
I've been out there, Debbie, and I'm familiar with this property, and I think the ingress road that comes into the subdivision, I think you could pretty much, you see it gets really narrow there, I think you could pretty much say that everything to the north of that's going to go into the,
And there's another ditch up there, it's the Nevada ditch too, so.
Finish your sentence. Everything.
that's going to go to the Brown ditch there, and then everything else will head south. And I've just been watching the grading of that and stuff like that, so I think that would be my assessment at least.
Well, and then all of these homes have driveways?
Yes,
garages?
they're single-family lots, so typically, one home per lot.
Yeah, and then you're looking at what, 3-car garages?
I don't have.
I'm just looking in terms of if you get a decent storm and and you get that washed down. I mean, planning something like this isn't planning for the little summer rains you get, or somebody watered their yard and someone got in their street and came down. It's for these bigger ones, and so, you've got a whole bunch of road that's used, it's got junk all over it, we know that. Driveways that have stuff, and just how much at some point because those ponds, as well designed as that is, and I think they're brilliant, but they, when you've got bigger issues, they don't handle that. And so I do think that, that I do have a concern that in some of the most extreme, that this would not hold up, and I worry greatly about the water quality in Cooley. I can be convinced that that's all safe. I'm not convinced with this right now, but I think that I would. I guess one of my other questions is, are we going to put in periodic water quality tests and management system in Cooley, particularly along that, so that we can keep a monitor? This is brand new. That was a horse farm forever. And so it didn't have, tar and oil and asbestos and all the other stuff that your cars produce, dumping in there, and whatever else residential brings. So
I do have some excerpts. I don't have the full drainage report with me, and I do have some excerpts. Though some of there's 4 bays, and that's a technical term of basically kind of a little pond before it gets to the pond. Some of the 4 bays, and they did oversize. To make it larger than actually what the code requires. And so, a lot of their design features did exceed the minimum requirements. And through a storm event, people talk about a 2-year storm, a 5-year storm, a 100-year storm. Well, there are chances that there are storms in excess of 100, but it's very hard, 100-year events, it's very hard to design for in excess of a 100-year event, but the design details did look at the 100-year events, and for instance, one of their 4 bays specifically had a required volume of 6,500 cubic feet of water, and they provided 17,000 cubic feet of water. And so they do acknowledge, and South Suburban was very close partner in reviewing these plans because they understand this asset completely as the maintenance responsibility. And so making sure that we had proper vegetation and proper sizing to not harm the lake.
well, will there be, is there an opportunity to put in some sort of timed measurement that would be appropriate for water quality along our main track?
I'm sorry, timed?
Some sort of agreed upon periodic report or checking of sampling of the water quality along there. That when it was a horse farm and it rained, it all went in to the ground, and then the groundwater, and that filters the water through the grass. It's now roofs and cement and asphalt, and so you don't have that sponge anymore. It does run off. So I think I would just feel a lot more comfortable if we set something. Wait a second, computer.
I'm not sure.
You saw that?
I did.
Crazy computer. But I would feel more comfortable, at least some reassurance. I think that it needs to be checked, and if over a period of 5 years everything continues to be fine, then maybe the worry goes away. But I think
You,
wouldn't hurt.
I think you have a better memory on this, or history, whatever, than I do with the 65 flood. What was this area like during the 65 flood?
It was a sand pit, wasn't it? Oh, sand, yeah.
It was used as an aggregate quarry.
Was it flooded?
Cooley was, but the property was a horse property.
It wasn't flooded?
It was flooded.
That's what I was asking. Now we have a couple of things happening downstream from the dam and I've not got all this in my head, but I'm wondering what that's being planned upstream that might potentially have some impact on this in a major water event combined with what this is doing. didn't say that well, but just taking in the whole system. I mean, I'd like us to plan for something fairly significant, because something fairly significant will happen sooner or later. And not in my lifetime, I hope, but maybe in Kyle's lifetime.
If I may, Mayor. But not Pat's.
Mark?
You are supporting. To address Councilmember Cole's question there are federal regulations that require a facility like Chatfield here to kind of plan for basically the ultimate disaster for downstream. Personally, I've never seen that kind of report, but if that's the question you're asking.
It wasn't totally the total Chatfield disaster, but I'm trying to remember what I heard in the last 4 or 5 months about something, I think, on the West Bank, up closer to Chatfield, and why I can't remember what it was. Does that ring any bells?
It does not, but we certainly could research that and see what we can find. And maybe just a quick comment back to what the mayor's, the questions. We certainly, in the staff communication on this kind of comes forward here, assuming this is what you want to do, for a first reading, then we certainly could elaborate on, the stormwater design of this thing, the frequency of the storm events, how that's accommodated in these things. So we could provide a lot more detail. And I think specifically on the sampling question, I think that is something that we should probably explore with the town of Columbine. The stormwater regulations in our state are going to be changing next year, and so sampling, quite honestly, on a larger scale throughout the city is going to be occurring. So that's kind of one question I would have, that might be applicable here. But even if it wasn't, we certainly could look at, some kind of arrangement here to sample, because it is a unique facility that we have at Cooley Lake, and how this property kind of drains into that is an interesting question.
What happens to that water in Cooley Lake? Does that eventually funnel over to the Platte?
Flip over
Or do we just lose it through evaporation?
So I believe, either through combination of some of the ditches kind of that go through there. There are floodplain areas too, but due to the proximity of the river and perhaps you can kind of see, the river kind of meanders through there. Probably during flood events, it likely becomes one and the same in certain locations, but during drier events,
There's a little spillway in the very north.
We only have Red Tail, I think it's Red Tail, is the only lake that we have that opens to the river.
The rest of it's probably groundwater. It's that was my guess.
So that was probably,
Moves by fluctuations in ground.
One other question. So, being a sand pit at one time or another, what about erosion? What do you know about the erosion of this water coming in at certain spots?
So the design of the outfalls is designed specifically to minimize erosion. There are specific designs of how the rocks would be placed and secured, and so as to prevent and minimize erosion. I think over time people have learned a lot of things, and ponds have kind of like the little grass edges and things like that, whereas now we're trying to go more natural to kind of secure things, and even the Jackass Gulch, the improvements that we've done there to kind of secure the banks and minimize erosion. So a lot of those design features are incorporated into, kind of how we design the spillways. And again, our water resources manager and South Suburban worked very closely with designers to make sure that, they're constructing, or they would construct the best design possible to kind of avoid.
I guess what I'm looking forward to see on this is that strong language that 20 years, whatever years from now, that ultimately the town of Columbine will be responsible for the maintenance, even though it's on the Littleton side.
We can certainly address that.
Yeah, and when does it become, this is being managed by South Suburban Parks and Recs, so, we're obviously the owner of the property, but, I imagine South Suburban would be in agreement with Columbine, it would be the city or South Suburban?
Well, we own the property, and as the property owner, generally, we are going to be the party more so than our manager of the property who's responsible for those flows. The only time the manager really becomes responsible would be if they were to do something that altered the drainage structures or drainage facilities. My big concern would be that I want to make sure that in the event for some reason, either we don't have an HOA on the hook, or that we have an assurance by the town of Columbine Valley that they will be responsible, because as the city manager indicated, stormwater regulations are changing. We're now getting into things like having to deal with monitoring sedimentation and actually the water quality of stormwater. And so those are all concerns that we need to make sure we have covered from our standpoint.
Kyle?
I think having a water quality monitoring agreement, whatever that looks like, it would be appropriate and a good idea. So I think that would be important to see moving forward. I don't have the same necessarily concerns that the mayor has. I mean, if you look at this, these are what, acre big lots. I mean, they're pretty big lots. It's not going to be a massive amount of impermeable surface. It's definitely a lot more than there is now. But the fact that, I mean, it's the flows from that property is going to the river now. It's going to go there. I mean, or into the lake. Everything on the north end that goes to that ditch goes directly into the river, not into the lake. So I think the only question I have is, what would be the ramification if we did not agree to this?
Well, then I think they would have to find some other way to dispose of that drainage without using our easement. I think one of the issues with that becomes that may not, at the end of the day, be something that from an engineering standpoint is the best result. I'm certainly not an engineer, but I think I can see that and understand why they would take this approach. So my concern would be, certainly from the city standpoint, we could say no, but we may have a different result that may not be the best solution for the drainage.
Yeah, I would assume they would just route everything into the brown ditch and have it go directly into the river, and that would probably be more impactful during a high precipitation event there when you have the holding pond there of Cooley Lake. So I'm fine.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so,
This will go to first reading then in July or August?
probably July.
July 17th, I believe.
That's what we're targeting, and we'll
Okay.
respond to, investigate the sampling and the other questions that we have. So if there's any updates.
If you can get those to us prior to the packet, that'd be fine.
You bet. We're happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. City manager?
Just a comment here. I think staff, and we're trying to look at the council's tentative calendar here for the next several months, and specifically around the budget. You know, I've sent a few emails, talked to many of you about trying to understand your schedule here, and I think, no surprise, this tends to be difficult. So we're trying to make sure that we have enough time for all of council to be present during the budget process here. So a long way to say that I've actually, in the tentative calendar, now added the 5th Tuesday that appears in a couple of months. So we have one in October, and I believe another one in July. And so staff's in the process here of trying to take all the budget and our workload, quite honestly, much what you viewed in the study session here last week, and making sure that we got appropriate times here that council feels comfortable you can get through this material here. I don't want to overburden you here on specific nights, but I clearly need the time to get a lot of this stuff before you. So in the next study session, I'm going to share with you a copy of the revised tentative calendar, and I'm going to check in with you at the study session to make sure that we're all good with that.
Fifth Tuesdays make a lot of sense.
Might as well. Okay. Anything?
You have a report from me in your packet, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to address it.
Okay, that it?
Questions for me?
All right, we're off next week. And then we have a study session the following Tuesday,
July
10th.
10th.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yes.